The roar of a jet engine tore through the still night, a shriek of metal that shattered the peace. Mara Harris froze, the warm mug of tea slipping from her fingers as a flash of silver light streaked across the sky. She barely registered the crash, the sickening sound of the plane splitting apart, black smoke trailing behind it as it fell toward the lake. For a moment, the world held its breath. She sprang from her chair without thinking, heart pounding. The night air hit her face like ice as she rushed to the edge of the dock. The plane's impact was violent, sending a surge of water crashing against the wooden pier, the sound reverberating in her chest. There was no time for panic. Her feet slipped on the wet wood as she threw herself into the freezing water. Her body screamed as the cold wrapped around her, but she swam toward the wreckage, her heart beating in time with the desperate urgency pulsing through her veins. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know why he mattered, but someone had to save him. A silhouette emerged from the depths. A man, impossibly still, his silver-white hair floating like tendrils of seaweed. The rest of the wreckage sank beneath him, disappearing into the dark abyss. His chest rose and fell, shallow, but he was alive. Mara's muscles burned as she pulled him to the surface, one arm wrapping around his chest. "Please," she whispered, fighting the rising panic. "Please stay with me." She kicked her legs hard, pulling him through the waves. The cold was unbearable, but she couldn't stop. Not now, not when she was so close. She dragged him ashore, the salt water pooling beneath him like a dark omen. His skin was unnaturally pale, his face etched with an ancient calm that unsettled her. But it was his eyes that held her, glowing with a strange amber light as he blinked up at her. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice a deep echo of something ancient. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her. "You're welcome," she muttered, unsure of what else to say. But when the man, his silver hair wet and clinging to his face, slowly sat up and glanced around, the air between them thickened. There was something otherworldly about him, something that made her skin prickle, her mind racing with questions she didn't have the answers to. "Who are you?" Mara finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze sharpened. "I am Ragnar," he said, his voice carrying a heavy, regal weight. "And you've just saved the Wolf King." Mara blinked, her head spinning. "Wolf King?" She shook her head, not quite processing his words. This was no ordinary man. No, Ragnar was something far older, far more dangerous. She had no idea what she was dealing with, but the pulse in her veins told her that whatever was coming, she wasn't prepared for it. As Ragnar closed his eyes and leaned back against the dock, his breath slow and deliberate, Mara realized that her life was no longer her own. She had unwittingly stepped into a world filled with creatures, politics, and powers beyond her comprehension. Her quiet life was over. She didn't know it yet, but Mara Harris had just become part of a much larger, darker story, and the night had only just begun. The moon hung low over the lake, its pale light casting long shadows across the dock. Mara stood frozen for a moment, her mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. She'd pulled a man from a sinking jet, only to find out that he was something more. Wolf King. The words echoed in her head, too heavy and strange to make sense of. Ragnar sat on the edge of the dock, his face turned upward to the sky, as if he were listening to something that Mara couldn't hear. His silver hair glistened in the moonlight, and his gaze was distant, like someone who had lived through centuries and seen the world change in ways that no one else could understand. "I'm sorry," Mara said, her voice barely a whisper. She had no idea what else to say. The quiet that settled between them was thick, as though the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ragnar didn't turn to her immediately. He stayed still, his hands resting at his sides, his fingers slightly curled, as if they still remembered the weight of a crown. When he spoke, his voice was low and smooth, with an undertone of something ancient. "You saved me," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "And for that, I am in your debt." Mara swallowed hard, still trying to wrap her head around the situation. I don't understand. Wolf King? What does that mean?" He finally turned to her then, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "It means I am the leader of an ancient pack," he said. "A pack of wolves, both human and animal, who have lived in the shadows for as long as your kind can remember. My people, Mara, are older than anything you've ever known." Mara's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "A pack? Are you saying you're not human?" "I am human," Ragnar said with a slight smile, though it was more weary than comforting. "And I am not. My pack is not what you would call human, but we live among you, in your world. We've always been there, just hidden." Mara felt a chill creep down her spine. "So, you're like some kind of werewolf?" Ragnar's lips pressed together in a tight line. "You could say that, but it's more complicated than that. We are creatures bound by both the human and the wolf, and I am the one who was chosen to lead them." Mara's head spun. "Chosen? So you're the king of these wolves?" Ragnar nodded. "Yes, I am the king. But I did not choose this path." The way he spoke made it sound like being a king was more of a burden than a privilege. "Why? What happened? Why were you exiled?" Ragnar took a deep breath, his gaze distant again. "I tried to change things," he said, his voice tight. "For centuries, the wolves have lived by a code of violence and blood. We've taken what we wanted, regardless of who we hurt. We were hunters, predators. I believed that we could evolve beyond that we could coexist with humans, that we could stop hiding and stop feeding off fear and chaos. But my people did not share my vision. They wanted power. They wanted to keep the old ways, and so they exiled me. They betrayed me." Mara could hear the pain in his voice, the weight of loss that seemed to hang on his every word. She couldn't imagine what it would be like, to be cast out from your own people, to fight for something better, only to be rejected by those you loved and led. "So, they sent you away?" Mara asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "They tried to kill me," Ragnar said, his eyes darkening. "But I survived, and now they want me back, dead or alive." Mara's chest tightened. "That's why the jet crashed. They sabotaged it, didn't they?" Ragnar's lips twisted in a grim smile. "Yes. They knew that I was on that flight, and they knew it would be my only chance to escape. They wanted to make sure I didn't get away." A shudder ran through Mara's body. She didn't know what to say. What could she say to something so monstrous? The idea that someone could do something like that, take another person's life so easily, was incomprehensible. But the more she looked at Ragnar, the more she realized that he wasn't the monster. He was a king, exiled and betrayed, and now he was fighting to survive. She felt something stir inside her, compassion, empathy. It was the same instinct that had driven her to dive into the freezing water to save him. But now she had a clearer understanding of just how much danger she had brought into her life. Ragnar was no ordinary man. He was a king, and his enemies were out there, hunting him. Ragnar shifted on the dock, drawing her attention back to him. "There's more, Mara. Something you need to know. The reason you saved me, that wasn't a coincidence." Mara frowned, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Ragnar's gaze softened as he looked at her. "There is a prophecy, one that has been passed down through the generations. It says that the one who saves the Wolf King will be bound to his fate, whether they want to be or not. The person who saves me will play a pivotal role in the future of my pack, and that person is you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mara's pulse raced as she tried to digest what he was saying. "Wait, you're saying that because I saved you, I'm..." What? Destined to help you? What does that even mean? It means that you are part of something much larger than you know, Ragnar replied. It means that your life is now tied to mine and to the fate of my pack. You can't walk away from this, Mara. Not now. You've already made your choice. Mara felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted any part of it, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just fate. It was a choice. And now she was stuck with the consequences. I don't know anything about your world, Ragnar, she said, her voice trembling. I'm just a regular person. I can't help you. I can't— You already are, Ragnar interrupted, his voice soft but firm. You've already helped me by saving me. And now, you can help me again. But you must decide, Mara. The pack is coming for me, and if I stay here, I'll bring them to you. If you want to help me, you must protect me, but it will cost you. Your life will never be the same. There's no turning back. Mara's mind spun as she tried to process everything he had just said. She had never asked for any of this. She had never asked to be pulled into a world of kings and prophecies, wolves and betrayals. But there was something in Ragnar's eyes that made her feel like she had no choice. She had already made her decision when she pulled him from the water. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice shaky, but I can't leave you to die. Ragnar nodded, his expression unreadable. Then it's settled. We leave tonight. Mara felt a knot tighten in her chest as Ragnar stood and moved toward the woods behind her house. The decision had been made, whether she was ready or not. She had already stepped into this dangerous world, and now she would have to face whatever came next. She followed him into the night, knowing that her life was about to change forever. The night was still, the kind of deep silence that only comes after a storm has passed, when the air is thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and damp wood. Mara sat in the dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the flickering candle on the coffee table. Her mind spun in endless circles, trying to make sense of what had happened. Ragnar's revelation had left her reeling. A wolf king, a pack of supernatural wolves, prophecies. She had never believed in anything beyond the mundane, beyond what she could touch and see. But the look in Ragnar's eyes, the weight of his words, told her that the world she knew was not the whole truth. Her gaze shifted to him as he sat on the couch, his posture still and regal, like he was waiting for something. His pale silver hair was unkempt, but there was something captivating about him, something ancient, something she couldn't quite place. Are you all right? Mara asked, her voice tentative. Ragnar looked up at her, his amber eyes gleaming with something she couldn't name. I will be, he said, his voice low but steady. But there are things coming that you cannot avoid. Mara's heart thudded in her chest. The last few days had been a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and strange truths. But it wasn't until now, as she sat across from Ragnar, that she fully grasped the magnitude of her actions. She had saved a king of wolves, and now her life was bound to his, whether she wanted it or not. What do we do now? She asked, her voice strained with the weight of her decision. Ragnar stood slowly, walking over to the window. His movements were fluid, almost predatory. We prepare. Before Mara could respond, the silence outside was broken by the unmistakable sound of approaching wheels. The rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves echoed through the night, growing louder by the second. It wasn't just one set of carriages, it was multiple. 5 black carriages. Mara's pulse quickened as she stood and moved to the window. She could see the gleaming black shapes moving toward her house, the lanterns on each carriage casting an eerie greenish glow. The horses were large and imposing, their breath visible in the cool night air, and the carriages themselves looked ancient, crafted from polished wood and iron, each one ominously sleek, as though designed to strike fear into anyone who looked upon them. She turned to Ragnar, her stomach sinking. Who are they? Ragnar's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. Enemies. My pack's enforcers. They've come for me." "Why now?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because they know I've survived," Ragnar replied, stepping away from the window. "They won't let me slip through their fingers again." The carriages pulled to a stop just outside her front yard, and the door of the first one swung open. Mara's breath caught in her throat as a tall woman stepped out. She was elegant, her black dress flowing in the night air like a shadow, and her presence seemed to dominate the space around her. Her hair was dark, her face sharp and angular, and her eyes gleamed with a predatory light that made Mara's stomach churn. The woman surveyed the house, her gaze sweeping over the windows, the yard, and finally resting on Ragnar. She didn't look at Mara. Instead, her lips curled into a slight smile, one that was all teeth and ice. "Ragnar," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, carrying an authority that Mara felt deep in her bones. "You've been found." Ragnar stiffened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Lady Isolde," he muttered, his voice edged with a mix of respect and disdain. "I thought you would be the last one to come." Lady Isolde's eyes flicked to him, her smile faltering for a split second. "You thought wrong," she said, her voice cold as she stepped forward, her long cloak billowing around her. "You have broken the pact, Ragnar. Your reforms have upset the balance of power. The pack has no room for weakness, and now you must be returned, dead or alive." Mara felt a chill run through her at the words, the implication that Ragnar's survival had put not only his life, but everyone's lives in jeopardy. "You've come for me," Ragnar said, his voice hardening, "to drag me back to a life of violence and fear. I won't go." Lady Isolde's eyes narrowed, and she took another step toward Ragnar. "You don't have a choice," she said, her tone icy. "Your actions have made you a liability. You were always a king, Ragnar, but now you are a rogue, a threat to our kind. You must return to the pack, or you will be hunted." Mara's heart pounded in her chest. This was not a game. These people, these wolves, would stop at nothing to reclaim Ragnar. And if they couldn't capture him, they would destroy him. She stepped forward, her hand gripping the edge of the doorframe as she faced Lady Isolde. "You're not taking him," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Ragnar saved my life. I won't let you take him from me." Lady Isolde's gaze flicked toward her then, an amused smirk crossing her face. "You," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are no match for us. You are merely a human, caught up in something far beyond your comprehension." Ragnar moved then, stepping in front of Mara. His eyes blazed with anger, but there was something more in them, a fierce protectiveness. "You will not touch her," he growled, his voice low and filled with power. "She has no part in this. She is under my protection." Mara's heart skipped a beat as she stood behind Ragnar. He was protecting her now, not just from the pack, but from whatever came next. She wasn't sure why he had chosen her, why she had been pulled into this dangerous world. But as Ragnar stood there, his back straight and his stance unwavering, Mara knew that she had made the right choice in standing by him. Lady Isolde took a slow, deliberate step back, her eyes flicking over Ragnar and then resting on Mara. "You're making a mistake, both of you," she said, her voice full of contempt. "You'll regret this. The pack will not let you hide forever. And when they find you—" She let the words hang in the air, a threat that felt as sharp as a blade. "There will be no place left for you." With that, she turned sharply and headed back to her carriage, the others following her, though their eyes lingered on Ragnar with a mix of hostility and disdain. As the last of the carriages pulled away into the night, Mara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Ragnar remained standing at the door, his gaze fixed on the road where the carriages had disappeared. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation settled heavily in the air between them. Finally, Ragnar turned to Mara, his expression softer than it had been before. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "You didn't have to protect me." Mara shook her head, still processing everything. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just some stranger. You're—" She didn't know how to finish the sentence. Everything she had thought she knew was being upended. Ragnar met her gaze with a quiet intensity. "You have more strength than you realize. You've already made your choice, Mara. Whether you're ready for it or not, you've become part of this." Mara's heart beat faster. She had already chosen to protect him, but now, she realized, there was no turning back. She was already involved in something far bigger than herself, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The door closed softly behind them as the sound of the night's tension lingered in the air. The storm that had been brewing was far from over, and Mara could feel it coming. The first visit had ended, but the true battle was only just beginning. The morning after the visit from Lady Isolde and her pack felt like the calm before a storm, though the weight in the air told Mara otherwise. She had spent the hours since the confrontation staring at the window, watching the world go by with an unsettling sense of quiet. The house was too still, too ordinary, considering what had happened, and the stark contrast made her skin crawl. She had thought that if she sat long enough, the tension might fade, but it only grew thicker with every passing minute. Ragnar had barely said a word after the Carriages left. He had withdrawn into himself, his posture rigid and distant, as though every muscle in his body was bracing for something. She had tried to talk to him, but each time she approached, he seemed to retreat further, pulling into a place she couldn't reach. As the day wore on, Mara began to notice the change in the air, a subtle shift that was impossible to ignore. The weather had gone from mild to oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She could feel it, an unseen presence, creeping closer with each passing hour. It wasn't just the weather. It was something more, something darker. Then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, it started. A car, then another, and another. The steady hum of engines outside her window sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the kind of traffic a small town like hers usually saw. These vehicles weren't normal. They were sleek, dark, and they moved with a purpose. She pressed her hand to the window pane, heart pounding in her chest as she watched a black SUV pull up outside her house. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that scanned the area with military precision. His presence was unsettling, predatory even. He wasn't here to ask for directions. Mara's breath caught in her throat. They're here. Ragnar had been right. They had found him. The pack had sent their forces. Mara turned quickly, almost stumbling as she rushed to the living room where Ragnar stood near the window, his silhouette framed by the fading light. He didn't need to see the man outside to know what was happening. "They're here," she said, her voice tight. Ragnar's eyes met hers, his expression grim. It was only a matter of time. He was weakening. She could see it now. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper than the night outside, and his shoulders slumped as though the weight of the situation was pressing him down further with every passing moment. The strain of running, hiding, and being hunted by his own pack was taking its toll. He had already suffered so much in that crash. His body was still healing, but the stress, the constant danger, was draining him. Mara didn't need to ask. She could see it in his eyes. "How bad is it?" "I'm not sure how much longer I can hold them off," Ragnar admitted quietly, stepping away from the window. "My wounds aren't fully healed, and if they get too close—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mara's heart pounded as she absorbed the weight of his words. She had already made the choice to protect him, but this was different. The pack was closing in, and she had no idea how to fight back against something so ancient, so ruthless. She had never asked for any of this. She didn't want to be part of this supernatural war. But now, with Ragnar's life on the line, she couldn't turn away. She had already crossed the line. She just hadn't known how far she would have to go to protect him. They won't stop until they find you, will they? Mara asked, her voice trembling. Ragnar shook his head, his expression hardening. No, they won't. They'll do whatever it takes to bring me back into their fold. They've always believed that power is everything. To them, my reforms are a threat, a challenge to the old order. I can't go back, Mara. I won't. And you'll die trying to avoid it, Mara replied, her tone sharp. I won't let that happen, not while I'm here. A fleeting, bitter smile tugged at Ragnar's lips, but it was gone in an instant. You don't know what you're saying, Mara. You're just a human. You can't fight them. I don't need to fight them, she said, a determination rising in her chest. I'll keep you safe, no matter what. For a moment, Ragnar didn't speak. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something darker, something he didn't want to let her see. You've already done more than I could have ever expected, he said softly. I don't deserve your protection. Mara reached out and placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. You're not going through this alone. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mara could feel the walls closing in. This small town, which had once seemed so safe, was now a battleground. She could hear the faint sound of tires on gravel, the creeping sense of being watched growing stronger with every passing minute. The wolves were getting closer. As night fell, the tension in the house escalated. Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Ragnar had gone to the back of the house to check for possible escape routes, while Mara tried to keep herself calm, pacing around the living room. The weight of the situation was suffocating, pressing down on her chest, but there was no turning back now. The car outside was still there. The man, whoever he was, hadn't left. And then the first knock came. It was soft at first, barely a tap, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through Mara's veins. Answer it, Ragnar called from the hallway. But be careful. If they know you're protecting me, they won't hesitate to use force. Mara nodded, though her throat felt dry. She walked cautiously to the door, her mind racing. This is it. They've come for him. They won't stop until they take him. When she opened the door, she found a tall man standing on her doorstep, his face shadowed under the brim of a wide hat. His clothes were dark, tailored, almost ancient in their style, and his eyes gleamed with a predatory intensity. He looked her over briefly, as if weighing her worth, before speaking in a deep, measured tone. I've come for the Wolf King, he said flatly, and you've kept him hidden long enough. Mara's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stepped back, her mind spinning. He's not here, she lied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. And I don't know where he is. You'll have to leave. The man's eyes flicked to her, narrowing as he took a step forward. Do not lie to me, human, he said, his voice low and cold. We know he's here, and if you don't hand him over, there will be consequences. Just then, Mara felt a shift behind her, a presence, unmistakable. Ragnar. He had returned from the back of the house, standing just out of view, his posture tense, his hand hovering near the doorframe as if ready to strike. Before Mara could react, Ragnar stepped forward, his voice like a growl. You've come to take me, then? The man's expression changed slightly, a flicker of something dark passing over his face. Ragnar, he said, as if tasting the name. Your days of rebellion are over. Return with us, or face the consequences. We're not alone. Mara's heart sank. She hadn't realized the gravity of the situation. The pack's forces were everywhere, closing in on all sides, and Ragnar's time was running out. She had to act fast. Ragnar's expression hardened, and he stepped toward the man, his hand moving to his side. I won't return to you. Not now. Not ever. With a flick of his wrist, Ragnar motioned for Mara to step back, his amber eyes never leaving the man's. You've come too late, and now you'll have to deal with the consequences. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of their words pressing down on both of them, but Mara knew that whatever came next, There was no turning back. She had already chosen to protect Ragnar, and the wolves would stop at nothing to find him. She just hoped she was strong enough to survive it. The night was growing darker, and the wolves were closing in. The silence that had settled over Mara's house was shattered by a sharp, urgent knock at the door. Her heart skipped, and she froze, the echo of the knock ringing in her ears. Ragnar, still standing in the hallway, met her eyes with a look of grim resolve. They both knew what was coming. "Stay back," he whispered, his voice low, tinged with a quiet urgency. "They've found us. It's only a matter of time now." Mara nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. The house, which had seemed so quiet and safe just a few days ago, now felt like a fragile shell about to crack under the weight of a storm. The knock came again, louder this time. But before Mara could move toward the door, the sound was replaced by something far more menacing, a distant crash, glass breaking, footsteps pounding across the yard. She felt the shift in the air, the creeping tension that had been building ever since Ragnar's enemies arrived. The pack was closing in. "Ragnar, what do we do?" Mara asked, her voice rising in panic. She had no experience with this kind of danger, no knowledge of how to fight or survive against beings who were clearly far more powerful than anything she had ever encountered. Ragnar didn't hesitate. His eyes hardened as he turned toward the door. "We fight!" Before Mara could react, the door burst open with a force that sent her stumbling back. Two men, wolves in human form, stormed into the room, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. They were massive, their muscles rippling beneath their black leather coats. The tension in the air was thick with the scent of danger, the very space around them seeming to pulse with an ancient, primal energy. Mara gasped, instinctively stepping back. But Ragnar was already moving, his body a blur of motion. "Get behind me," he ordered, his voice a low growl. Without thinking, Mara did as he commanded, pressing herself against the wall as Ragnar stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. The two wolves sneered at him, their lips pulling back to reveal sharp teeth. "You've made a grave mistake, Ragnar," one of them said, his voice like gravel, low and menacing. "You defied the pack, you betrayed us, and now you'll pay the price." Ragnar didn't flinch. His gaze remained unwavering, his body coiled like a spring. "You've come for me," he said, his voice calm but filled with a power that made the air tremble. "But you will not leave with me." Before the wolves could make another move, Ragnar lunged. His speed and power something beyond human comprehension. In one swift motion, he tackled the nearest wolf, sending him crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. The other wolf charged, but Ragnar was already on his feet, spinning to meet the attack. The fight was fast and brutal, Ragnar moving with a deadly grace that seemed to blur the lines between human and animal. Mara watched in stunned silence as Ragnar fought. His strength was unreal. His body flowed like water, every movement a calculated strike, every step a warning. But even as powerful as he was, it was clear that his enemies were no slouches. The wolves he faced were just as skilled, their movements swift and merciless. The battle raged across the room, sending furniture flying and breaking windows as the wolves used everything in their power to subdue Ragnar. Mara, still frozen, watched as the two wolves closed in on Ragnar, their fangs bared and claws extended. She couldn't just stand there. She had to do something, but what could she do? She had no weapons, no training. Her mind raced, but then something inside her snapped. This was her home. Ragnar had risked everything to protect her, and now she had to do the same. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning for anything that could help. Then, in a split second, she spotted it. The baseball bat in the corner of the room, the one she had kept as a reminder of her short-lived attempt at playing with Clara. Without thinking, she grabbed it and ran toward the chaos. Ragnar was holding his own, but he was starting to tire, his movements slowing as the wolves kept pressing in. One of them struck him hard across the chest, sending him crashing into the table. That was when Mara found her courage. She swung the bat at the nearest wolf, catching him across the back with a sickening crack. The wolf howled in pain, spinning toward her with a look of pure fury, but Mara didn't back down. She swung again, this time aiming for his head. The bat connected with a solid thud, and the wolf staggered, disoriented but not defeated. Ragnar, seeing the opening, sprang into action. With one swift motion, he grabbed the wolf by the throat and lifted him off the ground, his other fist slamming into the wolf's face with a sickening crunch. The wolf went limp, dropping to the floor like a rag doll. Mara stood frozen for a moment, the bat still in her hands, her heart racing. She couldn't believe she had just hit a supernatural creature. She had just fought alongside Ragnar. It felt surreal, but there was no time to process it. She looked to Ragnar, who was now facing the last of the pack's forces. He was breathing heavily, his movements slower now, his body showing signs of strain. Despite his power, the fight had clearly taken its toll on him. The blood from his wounds was starting to seep through his torn shirt, staining his pale skin. "You're not done yet," Mara said, stepping forward. She wasn't sure what she was trying to say, but it was all she could manage in the face of the chaos. Ragnar's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something darker, something that told her he was grateful for her help, but that this was far from over. "No," he said quietly, "but we will be soon." The last wolf charged, but Ragnar was ready. This time the battle was over in seconds. With a twist of his body and a powerful strike, he sent the wolf crashing into the wall, where he slumped unconscious, blood staining the floor beneath him. Mara let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her. The room was in ruins, broken furniture, shattered glass, and the bodies of the pack members lying still on the floor. It was over, for now. Ragnar stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving as he wiped the blood from his lip. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Mara felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She had seen the battle, witnessed Ragnar's incredible power, and she knew that this was far from the end. The pack would not stop. They would keep coming, keep hunting him, and now they would come for her too. "I'm not running," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I'll help you fight. I'll protect you." Ragnar looked at her, a mixture of awe and sadness in his eyes. "You don't know what you're asking, Mara. The pack will destroy everything in their path, and you could be caught in the crossfire." "I don't care," she said, stepping closer to him. "You've protected me. Now I'm protecting you." Ragnar studied her for a long moment, then nodded, a reluctant respect in his gaze. "Then we fight together." He was right, though. The real battle was still to come. As they stood amidst the wreckage of the room, the pressure of the situation hung heavy in the air. Ragnar knew that in order to protect Mara and to protect everything he had worked for, he would have to confront his enemies head-on, but this time he couldn't do it alone. It was time to make a plan. A final stand. The wolves had closed in, and Ragnar would not run. The night was a blanket of uncertainty as Mara and Ragnar approached the stronghold of the pack, the heart of their power, an ancient stone arena buried deep in the wilderness, untouched by time. The air was thick with tension, and Mara could feel every step echoing like the slow beat of a war drum in her chest. The journey had been long and silent, with Ragnar never once looking back at the house they had abandoned, his gaze fixed solely on the road ahead. He was ready for this. Mara, on the other hand, had never been further from ready. She had no experience with ancient politics or supernatural war. All she knew was that she couldn't let Ragnar face this alone, not when she had already chosen to stand by his side. The arena loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the dim stars, a ruin of stone pillars and crumbled walls. It was a place that had seen centuries of bloodshed. Tonight, it would bear witness to a final battle that would decide the future of the pack, and perhaps of the world Ragnar was trying to change. "We're close," Ragnar said, his voice low and tinged with the weight of what was coming. Mara nodded, her hand clenched tightly around the strap of her bag. She didn't know if it was her own fear or the gravity of Ragnar's presence that made her heart pound so fiercely, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The pack's stronghold had always been a place of tradition, an ancient space where power was decided not just by strength but by the old laws, laws that Ragnar had defied with his reforms, laws that demanded bloodshed, cruelty and dominance over mercy, cooperation and peace. Tonight, those laws would clash with the ideals Ragnar had fought so hard to bring to life. "I can't ask you to do this," Ragnar said, turning to face her as they stood at the entrance of the arena, the shadows of the ruins swallowing them whole. "You don't know what they'll do to you. You don't know what I'm walking into." Mara looked up at him, her eyes steady, her voice unwavering. "You don't get to decide that for me. I'm with you, Ragnar. I've chosen this." He didn't say anything for a moment, only studying her with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. Then, finally, he nodded. "You've made your choice," he said quietly, the weight of those words hanging heavily between them. "Then, together, we face whatever comes next." They stepped into the arena, the ground beneath them a dark and worn path that led to the heart of the stronghold. The once proud walls were cracked and chipped, ancient stone now covered in moss and vines. And in the center, the heart of the pack's power, an elevated platform, a throne-like seat that had long been vacant. Tonight, it would not remain empty. As they moved deeper into the arena, Ragnar's enemies began to assemble, emerging from the shadows like phantoms. They stood at the far edge of the arena, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The pack's warriors were a mix of men and wolves, each of them carrying the weight of centuries-old traditions in their blood. Some were clad in ceremonial armor, others in dark, tattered clothing, but all of them exuded the same air of quiet menace. At the front of the pack stood Lady Isolde. Her gaze was fixed on Ragnar as she stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. She was flanked by two towering wolves, each more menacing than the last. Her expression was cold, calculating. "I see you've brought the human with you," Lady Isolde said, her voice sharp, almost mocking. "How quaint! Do you really think your mortal companion can help you in this? You've already lost, Ragnar." Ragnar's gaze hardened, and he stepped forward, his presence commanding. "I haven't lost anything yet, Isolde. You may have the numbers, but you do not have the strength to win this." Lady Isolde's lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile without warmth. "Strength?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You still think you can change the laws of our kind? You think mercy, peace, and cooperation can ever replace the power of the hunt? The bloodshed that has sustained us for centuries?" Ragnar didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but beneath the words lay a steely resolve. "I don't believe in power at the cost of others. The old ways have failed us, and if they continue, we will be nothing but monsters. There's a better way, one that doesn't demand the destruction of everything in its path." The tension in the air thickened as the pack's warriors shifted, eyeing Ragnar with disdain. Lady Isolde raised a hand, signaling for silence. She stepped toward Ragnar, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. "You speak of change as though it's a noble pursuit. But change is not what this world needs. The wolves need strength, power, and those who do not accept the old laws will be destroyed." Mara stood by Ragnar's side, her heart racing. She could feel the pressure of the situation pushing against her, but she refused to look away. She refused to let fear stop her. She had seen Ragnar's strength, his resolve, and she had made the decision to stand with him. The supernatural world was dangerous, but it was nothing compared to the terror of losing her own humanity. Isolde's gaze flicked to Mara, then back to Ragnar. "You may have thought you could hide from us," she said, her voice softening. "But this is the end, Ragnar. It's time to come home." Ragnar's face darkened. "You are mistaken if you think I'll ever go back." Lady Isolde's lips curled into a smile. "Very well. If you refuse, we'll do what must be done." With a snap of her fingers, the air seemed to shift, and suddenly the pack's warriors were moving in on them, circling like wolves closing in on prey. Ragnar stepped forward, his posture rigid, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes glowing with barely contained power. But it wasn't just physical strength that would decide this battle. Ragnar knew that. This would be a battle of wills, of ideals. It would be a test of his beliefs against the pack's centuries-old traditions. As the first wolf lunged at him, Ragnar's eyes flashed with determination. He met the attack with lightning speed, his fists striking with the force of a freight train. The wolf fell back, stunned, but the others closed in, their eyes filled with fury. Mara felt a rush of adrenaline. She didn't have Ragnar's strength, his supernatural power, but she could help. She had to. She grabbed a nearby stone, hefting it in her hands, and hurled it at one of the wolves. It struck him square in the chest, sending him reeling. "Get to the center!" Ragnar shouted, his voice commanding. "Stay behind me!" Mara obeyed, moving to the center of the arena as Ragnar took on the pack's warriors one by one. He moved like lightning, his body a blur of power and grace, knocking wolves aside with ease. But even as he fought with everything he had, it was clear that he couldn't do this alone. The pack was too strong, too determined. Then, with a flash of recognition, Ragnar saw his opening. He leapt toward Lady Isolde, his body propelled by sheer willpower. The pack moved to intercept, but Mara could see the shift in the air. The tension that had been building was about to break. Ragnar's hand caught Lady Isolde's throat, lifting her off the ground as the crowd of warriors closed in around them. "This ends now," he said, his voice steady, commanding. "I will not return to the pack. I will not bow to their violence." The air seemed to pulse with energy as the wolves hesitated, unsure of what to do. Ragnar's power was undeniable, but the question was whether it would be enough to change the course of history. With a final, defiant cry, Ragnar threw Lady Isolde to the ground. The warriors around them shifted uneasily, their once unwavering loyalty to the old ways faltering. Mara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. This was the turning point. Ragnar had proven that his strength was not just in his power, but in his resolve. He had shown the pack that mercy and peace were stronger than violence and fear. But the battle wasn't over. The wolves would never accept this easily. Ragnar's victory had only just begun. And the true test was yet to come. The pack would not give up without a fight, and Mara, standing by Ragnar's side, knew that their struggle for peace was far from finished. The real war had only just begun. The blood of the battle was still fresh in the air as the dust began to settle. The cries of the fallen had quieted, leaving only the eerie stillness of the arena in its wake. Mara stood in the center of the ancient stone arena, her heart still racing from the chaos. She felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet, though it hadn't really moved at all. Everything around her felt too still, too quiet after the intensity of the fight that had just taken place. Ragnar stood a few feet away, his body covered in scratches and bruises, his expression grim. His silver hair, once so immaculate, now hung in wet strands around his face, matted with blood and sweat. Despite the toll the battle had taken on him, there was something about his posture that remained regal, unbroken. His victory over Lady Isolde and the pack's warriors had not been without its cost, but it was a victory nonetheless. The wolves that remained, those who had fought for Ragnar's reforms, stood scattered around the perimeter, some tending to the wounded, others staring into the distance, their faces marked by the weight of what had just transpired. Ragnar had proven that the old ways of violence and bloodshed were no longer the only path for the pack. But the future was uncertain. Mara's mind whirled with 1,000 thoughts, none of them clear. The battle had been chaotic, and Ragnar's victory had come at a high price. Many of his loyal followers had fallen in the conflict, and the pack that had once been a symbol of power and fear was now in disarray. The fight for peace had come at a cost, and the pack was fractured, with some still loyal to Ragnar's vision, while others refused to let go of the traditions that had bound them for centuries. Ragnar had achieved what many thought impossible. He had defeated those who would see him dead, and in doing so, he had forged a path forward for his people. But the aftermath of the battle was as heavy as the fight itself. Mara watched as Ragnar moved toward the center of the arena, his steps slow, deliberate. He was the king now, though it didn't feel like a triumph. His power was not in the throne, not in the title he had claimed, but in the hope he had sparked. He had fought for something greater than himself, for a pack that had long been lost to the darkness of violence. But even as Ragnar stood tall, the weight of what had happened hung heavily between them. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment they shared a silence that said everything. The battle was over, but the war, his war, was far from finished. "Mara," Ragnar said, his voice quieter now, the harshness of the battle fading from his tone. "It's not over yet. We've won this fight, but the real work is just beginning." Mara nodded, unsure of what to say. She had never imagined her life would lead to something like this. Fighting supernatural beings, standing beside a wolf king, choosing a side in a battle for an ancient pack's future. She had always been ordinary, living in a small town, surrounded by the mundane, but now, the mundane seemed like a distant memory, a life that no longer fit her. "Will it be enough?" Mara asked, her voice soft, unsure. "Will the reforms stick, or will the pack fall apart?" Ragnar's eyes darkened, and he looked away for a moment, as if weighing his words. "I don't know," he admitted. "There are those who will never accept change. They will always see me as a threat to the old ways. The pack is fractured. Some will follow me, but many will resist. I cannot do this alone." Mara felt a lump form in her throat. She knew that Ragnar couldn't carry this burden alone. She had seen what he was capable of in the battle, but she also saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weariness that seemed to be slowly overtaking him. His vision, his dream for the pack, was noble, but the price of it was high. She stepped closer to him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. "You don't have to do it alone," she said quietly. "I'm here, Ragnar. You don't have to fight this battle by yourself." Ragnar turned to her, his gaze intense. "I've never asked you to be a part of this world. I never wanted to pull you into this." "But you didn't pull me in," Mara said, shaking her head. "I chose this. I chose to be with you. You saved me, and now I'm here to help you, whatever it takes." Ragnar's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, Mara saw the vulnerability in him, the part of him that wasn't a king, a leader, but just a man who had fought for something greater than himself. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But even with you by my side, I don't know if we can fix what's broken. The pack will fight me every step of the way." "Maybe they will," Mara said. "But we don't have to fight alone. You've shown them a different way. Now we have to show them it's possible. We have to make them see that peace, that change, is possible. But it's not just you. It's all of us." Ragnar's gaze lingered on her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what was at stake hung heavily between them, but there was something else in the air now, something that Mara couldn't name. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of something more. "Are you ready for this?" Ragnar asked softly, his voice full of quiet determination. Mara nodded, her heart steadying. "I'm ready." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Ragnar's enemies had been defeated, but the aftermath was far from over. The pack, once a symbol of fear and dominance, was now fractured. Some had accepted Ragnar's reforms and stood by his side, while others still clung to the old ways, unwilling to let go of the traditions that had bound them for centuries. Mara worked alongside Ragnar, helping him navigate the complexities of rebuilding the pack. She learned more about the supernatural world, its politics, its rules, and the power dynamics that shaped everything. It was a world she had never imagined existed, but now it was her world, too. In the days that followed, Ragnar held meetings with his followers, discussing the future of the pack. There were tense moments where old loyalties collided with new ideas, but with every passing day, the pack began to shift. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but progress was being made. Mara stood by Ragnar's side through it all, offering support, guidance, and a steady hand. She had never been part of this world, but she had chosen to be a part of his. And with each passing day, she realized just how much she had come to care for him, not just as a king, but as a person. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of the ruins, Ragnar turned to her. "I've never had someone stand by me like this," he said, his voice soft. "You've shown me that there's more to life than power, more than just survival." Mara smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to help," she said. "But you're the one who's showing us all what's possible." Ragnar's expression softened, and for a brief moment he looked like the man she had first met on that stormy night. Tired, broken, but determined to change the world. The future of the pack was uncertain, but for the first time, Mara felt like they were on the right path. There were still battles ahead, and the road would be difficult, but she knew one thing for certain. Ragnar had shown them all a better way, and together they would rebuild what had been broken. That night, as the stars shone above, Ragnar and Mara stood side by side, looking out over the ruins of the arena. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of a new beginning. "You've changed everything," Mara said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Ragnar turned to her, a small, wistful smile on his lips. "We've changed everything." And for the first time, Mara felt like they had truly won. The battle wasn't over, but the war for the future of the pack and the world they had fought for was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next. The weeks that followed the battle in the arena were long, filled with tension and hard decisions. Ragnar's victory had not only shifted the balance of power within his pack, but it had ignited something far greater. An ideal that was both radical and dangerous, a future where humans and supernatural beings could coexist in peace. Mara stood beside him every step of the way, learning the intricacies of Ragnar's world. She had never imagined a life like this, full of ancient politics, alliances, and age-old traditions. The supernatural had always been something relegated to myths and stories in her mind, but now it was her reality. The pack, once a fierce and brutal force that operated under the rule of fear and dominance, was in a state of flux. The victory had come at a price, but it had also opened a door to a new beginning, a beginning where mercy and cooperation were valued more than strength and bloodshed. Ragnar's dream of reforming his people was unfolding before her eyes, but it wasn't without resistance. There were wolves who still believed in the old ways, wolves who saw Ragnar's vision as a betrayal, and they weren't going to let it go without a fight. Mara had known that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated just how much resistance they would face. As Ragnar worked to rebuild the pack, he was met with contempt from those who refused to accept change. Old loyalties ran deep, and it would take more than just words to convince them that peace was possible. "Not everyone is going to be on board with this," Ragnar said one evening, standing by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. The darkening sky reflected in his amber eyes, a quiet storm brewing within. "I expected resistance, but not this much." Mara joined him by the window, her gaze following his. The view was breathtaking, the vast wilderness stretching out before them, but even here, in the solitude of the forest, there was no escaping the challenges ahead. "Old ways die hard," she said softly, her voice filled with empathy. "But you're not alone, Ragnar. You have me. You have the pack members who believe in your vision." Ragnar's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You've given me more than I deserve," he said quietly. "I've always had a plan. I've always known what I wanted for the future of the pack, but I never thought I'd have someone like you beside me." Mara turned to him, her heart swelling with something she hadn't expected. Love, maybe. It was still new, this connection between them, but it had already become something undeniable. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she was ready to face it with Ragnar, no matter what it took. "You don't have to do it alone," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "We're in this together." And that was how it began, how they started rebuilding, not just the pack, but their world, the world of wolves and humans, and the delicate balance between them. Mara found herself at the heart of it all, helping Ragnar navigate the politics of the supernatural world, and guiding the humans who had come to trust them. Days turned into weeks, and the work of rebuilding the pack was slow and difficult. The pack was divided. Some wolves had embraced Ragnar's vision, understanding the need for change, while others were unwilling to let go of their old ways. They had seen centuries of bloodshed, and the idea of peace was as foreign to them as the notion of mercy. But Ragnar didn't waver. He held meetings with the dissenters, tried to reason with them, and though it was clear they weren't ready to accept his reforms, he didn't give up. He believed that eventually they would see the truth, that peace was the only way forward. Mara, too, was learning to navigate the intricacies of this new world. She had never considered herself a leader, never imagined a life where she would be at the forefront of such monumental change. But as time passed, she began to realize that she had a unique role to play in this new order. She was human, yes, but her connection to Ragnar went deeper than just fate. There was something more to it, something unspoken. She could feel it, a bond that was both ancient and timeless, as if her very existence was tied to the supernatural in a way that she hadn't fully understood before. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of the house, Ragnar turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "You've changed, Mara," he said quietly. "You're stronger than I ever realized." She looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" Ragnar's gaze softened as he leaned forward, his voice low. "You've adapted. You're not just standing beside me anymore. You're becoming a part of this world. And I don't just mean in the way that you've accepted my reforms. You're becoming more than you realize." Mara felt a sudden chill run through her, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something powerful. "Ragnar, what are you trying to say?" Her voice was cautious, unsure. He paused, studying her. "I've seen it. There's power inside you, Mara. I don't know where it comes from, but it's there. You're starting to tap into it, the bond we share. It's not just a connection between us. It's something more, something that could change everything." Mara shook her head, disbelief written across her face. "I'm not one of them. I'm just human." Ragnar's smile was small but filled with warmth. "I don't think being human disqualifies you from greatness. You have a strength inside you, Mara. You've always had it." She looked down at her hands, the reality of his words settling on her. It was true. There was something different inside her now, something she couldn't ignore. The more time she spent in this world, the more she began to feel it, this power, this strange connection to the supernatural. It was as if her very essence was beginning to change, like she was becoming part of something much larger than herself. As Mara's connection to Ragnar deepened, so did her understanding of her role in the pack's future. She wasn't just a passive observer anymore. She was becoming a leader in her own right, helping to mediate between the wolves and the humans, finding ways to bring them together despite the resistance. It wasn't easy. There were countless moments of tension, moments where the pack's ancient traditions seemed impossible to break. But Mara had learned something important through all of this. Change never came without struggle, and if she had to be the one to bear that struggle, then she would. One day, as Mara and Ragnar met with a group of human allies who had come to help with the rebuilding, she found herself standing at the front of the room, addressing the gathered crowd. It was the first time she had ever spoken to such a group, and she felt the weight of their expectations on her shoulders. "This isn't just about peace," Mara said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is about showing the world that we can coexist, that we can be more than what we were. We can create something new, something that respects both the human and the supernatural." She felt Ragnar's gaze on her, a quiet pride in his eyes. And for the first time, Mara realized that this wasn't just his fight. It was hers, too. She had come a long way from the quiet life she had once known, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She knew what she had to do. Days passed, and the pack slowly began to rebuild. Though it was clear that not everyone was ready to embrace Ragnar's reforms, Mara could feel the tension mounting in the air, the underlying threat of those who sought to undermine their efforts. But she didn't falter. She stayed by Ragnar's side, learning, leading, and guiding the pack through its growing pains. And as she did, she began to understand her place in this world, not as a mere bystander, but as a key player in the future of both the human and supernatural worlds. Together, with Ragnar, she would build a new order, one where peace wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. The world they had fought for was still fragile, but it was theirs to shape. And Mara, now more than ever, was ready to face whatever came next. It had been months since the final battle in the arena, and while the scars of that day still marked the pack, the winds of change had blown through them, irrevocably altering their path. The quiet disarray that had followed Ragnar's victory was slowly but surely being replaced with something far stronger, something more unified. Ragnar's rule, once uncertain and fragile, had solidified. The reform he had fought for, peace between humans and supernatural beings, was no longer a distant dream, but a living, breathing reality. It had taken time, countless conversations and difficult decisions, but the pack was growing stronger every day. Old enemies had been defeated, and with them, the harsh traditions that had governed their people for centuries. Those who had refused to accept Ragnar's vision had either been persuaded or left the pack to fight their battles elsewhere. But it wasn't just Ragnar who had changed. The pack itself had transformed, its core beliefs shifting from dominance and violence to cooperation and respect. There were still challenges, of course. The supernatural world was never going to be a peaceful utopia, but the pack was learning to live with the new reality Ragnar had promised them. And at the heart of it all was Mara, Ragnar's partner, his equal in a way neither of them had expected. The bond between them had deepened in ways Mara hadn't fully anticipated. What had started as a shared struggle for survival had evolved into something more profound. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared strength that didn't need words. Ragnar, with all his power, had become the king of a united pack. But Mara had become something else, something just as necessary to the world they were building. She was the voice of reason, the mediator between humans and wolves, the symbol of the change that had come. And it wasn't just the pack that was changing. Mara herself had transformed. She could feel the power inside her, a growing connection to the supernatural world that went far beyond the bond she shared with Ragnar. The more time she spent in this world, the more she realized that she was no longer just a human. There was something deeper, something more ancient coursing through her veins. The strange bond she shared with Ragnar, the way she had always felt connected to him, now seemed to make more sense. It was as though her very existence had been tied to this world all along, as if her life had always been destined to intertwine with his. Mara stood at the edge of the pack's camp, watching the wolves train, their movements fluid and powerful. The pack was no longer a ragtag group of survivors. It was a united force, a family forged in battle. She felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished, in what Ragnar had led them to. But she also knew that the hard work was far from over. There would always be those who resented the changes, those who clung to the old ways. The pack had earned peace, but they would have to fight to keep it. Ragnar walked up beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm that sometimes swirled around them. "You're thinking too much," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I can see it in your eyes." Mara smiled, though it was tinged with a sadness she couldn't quite shake. "I can't help it. We've come so far, but I can't stop thinking about everything we've lost, about the ones who didn't make it." Ragnar's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've lost much, but we've gained more than we ever thought possible." Mara nodded, though her heart still ached for the wolves who had given their lives for this new beginning. But Ragnar was right. They had gained more than they had lost. They had created something beautiful together, a new world, one where peace was no longer just a dream. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the camp, Mara turned to Ragnar. "Do you think we'll ever truly be safe? Or will we always be fighting to protect this peace?" Ragnar's gaze hardened, as if he were seeing something far beyond the horizon. "There will always be enemies, Mara. Always. But as long as we fight for what's right, as long as we stand together, we have a chance at something better." Mara looked at him, his words echoing in her heart. She had never imagined her life would lead her here, to this place, this purpose. She had never imagined that she would be the one to stand by Ragnar's side, to help him lead this pack into a new era. And yet, here she was. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ragnar's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Regret what?" "Bringing me into all of this," Mara said, her eyes searching his face. "This world is dangerous. It's violent. You didn't ask for me to be a part of it." Ragnar reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "I never regretted it," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I never asked for you to be a part of this world, but I'm glad you are. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Mara's heart fluttered in her chest as she stared up at him, the weight of his words settling over her. She had chosen to stand beside him. She had chosen to fight for this future, this world where peace was possible, and she would never regret that choice. They stood together in the fading light, watching the pack train, their movements powerful and graceful. The future of the pack was uncertain, but for the first time, Mara felt like it was something worth fighting for. Together, they had created something new, something beautiful, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following their conversation were filled with progress and setbacks, each day a delicate dance between the old and the new. The pack was still divided, but the cracks in the old order were becoming more evident. More wolves were beginning to accept Ragnar's vision, though there were still those who clung to the past. Ragnar continued to lead with compassion, and Mara worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the humans and the wolves. But there was a new sense of unity in the air. The pack was beginning to take shape in a way that felt more like a family than a collection of powerful beings. The wolves were learning to trust Ragnar, to believe in the idea of peace, even if it was still hard for some of them to fully embrace. Mara, too, was finding her place within this new world. She had once been an outsider, a human in a world of supernatural beings, but now she was an integral part of the pack. She had learned to listen to the wolves, to understand their needs, their fears, and their hopes. And in return, they were beginning to listen to her. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Ragnar looked at Mara, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed this pack," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You've changed me." Mara smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "We've changed each other," she said softly. "Together." Ragnar reached out and took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "I've made many mistakes in my life, but I know one thing for certain," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You are the future of this pack, Mara. You are the key to its survival." Mara squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined her life would lead her here, to this place of power and purpose. She had never imagined that she would be a leader in a world she hadn't even known existed. But now, standing beside Ragnar, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The fire crackled in the silence between them, and Mara looked up at the stars above. The future of the pack was uncertain, but together they would face whatever came next. They had created something new, something worth fighting for, and as long as they had each other, they would continue to fight for it, no matter the cost. The world was changing, and so were they, and for the first time in a long time, Mara felt like she belonged, like she had a purpose, a future, and a family that would always be there to stand beside her. The pack was no longer just a group of wolves. It was her home, her place in this strange, beautiful world. And together they would build a future unlike any the world had ever seen. As the night wore on, Mara found herself standing at the edge of the camp once again, looking out at the stars. The pack was united, stronger than ever, and Ragnar was right beside her. They had come so far, but there was still so much left to do. The future was uncertain, but Mara no longer feared it. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she was no longer alone. Together, they had built something that would change the world. And with that thought, Mara finally let go of the fear that had plagued her since the moment she had met Ragnar. The pack was her family, and she was ready to lead them into the future, whatever it held.